Welcome to Vision India at 75. Amrit Mahotsav series. This is Vision India Forum, Vision India at 75, which is to celebrate 75 years of India's glorious history. Today is the World Press Freedom Day. The great N. Narasimha Ram is there with us. And it's a very proud moment for the nation, and it's going to be a legacy that we are going to be creating in the next 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour or so, wherein people like Mr. N. Ram, we've also got Justice KG Balakrishnan ji, a patron of the forum, who has been supporting us almost frequently for the last 6 months by his gracious presence. An authority on law and order, authority on legal issues. Freedom of speech and expression is something which we are going to be talking about with a focus around media in particular today. It's an area which is of perennial importance for also the country in the next 25 years. A quarter which will define India's path towards numero uno position in the global scenario, because we've transgressed a huge distance in the last 75 years with a lot of ups and downs. And Mr. M. Ram and Mr. KG Balakrishnan have been testimony to more or less most of the incidents. And I look forward to hearing from both of them. And then there will be more guests who will be joining step by step, including we are expecting General VK Singh to join us today. He just called me from the constituency because of Eid. Let me also wish happy Eid and also a happy Akshay Tritiya to all the viewers of Vision India Forum. Especially to the guests concerned, the guests present. Justice Saab, thank you once again. Mr. N. Ram, you're an authority on press, you're an authority on media, you're an authority on national issues. You've been the man who brought to the forefront the Bofors issue. You're the man who knows the subject of freedom of speech and expression in and out. You're the man who can guide India towards a more, egalitarian society, towards a more, balanced society, and a more powerful nation in the next 25 years to come. Thank you so much to you, sir. I now leave the opening remarks, first of all, to Justice KG Balakrishnan. Then we'll have Mr. N. Ram speak about freedom of speech and expression in India.
Mr. Amit and respected Sri N. Ram, the subject is very important. The World Freedom of Press Day, and freedom of press is very vital to the Indian democracy. For any democracy, freedom of press is so vital. Because it is the key thing which transforms idea from one person to another. And the people have got a right to know what is happening in this country. And they generate ideas. And the essence of these various views is the way in which the country should move forward. That is why the freedom of press is so important. Everyone has got a right to get informed of what is happening in this country. And the authorities have got a right to know the way in which the country is progressing. So that is very important. The freedom of press is so important. Any form. But it so happens that every administrative setup will have try to curtail some freedom, and that is also to protect the interests of the community, interests of the various groups of people. One group may be targeting another group. One section may be trying to target and make use of this the freedom of the information, and that is a right guaranteed under the Constitution. And not only for the press, but for all ordinary citizens have got the right of freedom of speech and expression. And that right is valuable only when one gets information about what is really happening. If nobody knows what is happening in the neighborhood, he will not be able to express his opinion, express his views on the subject, and the freedom of speech and expression is just as valuable. Freedom of human rights, freedom of justice, freedom of peace, all these are valuable rights, and it is to be protected. And the authority, any sort of curtailment is being made, it will affect the progress of the country. So it is we are got into a country where there are large number of publications. Now the social media is also so important. Social media, the different groups of social media, the Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, all these, they are all information passing on. But I don't know what sort of control over them all these is possible. We should have control. We don't have proper legislation on to how to curtail the misuse and abuse of the freedom of press. That is not very, it is not that easy also to curtail the freedom and to create a sort of rigid rules. It is, we should have the inner conscience that we shall not hurt the feelings of others. We shall not hurt the feelings of other group. That the press also should feel, and the various large number of journalists are working throughout India from morning to evening, and most of them work in the late night for giving information to them. And world is shrinking because we know what is just happening, what is happening in South Africa, what is happening in Paris, what is happening in Copenhagen, or what is happening in USA. We all know within seconds we know. That is the freedom of information we have got. So any sort of curtailment is caused, then we are denied, and we are not really enjoy the freedom of press. So I am I congratulate Mr. Amit for having chosen this day for having discussion. You have got very eminent person like Mr. Ram and others to talk on the subject, and I think they will give you very, very valuable information on this subject. Thank you. Thank you.
Sir, thank you so much. Honorable Chief Justice, former Chief Justice of India, KG Balakrishnan, sir, thank you so much for the opening remarks. Major General Ranjit Singh, one of the great soldiers of the 71 war, and he's somebody who's been a part of the forum. 21st June, he's a yoga fanatic. On the 21st of June last year, during the peak pandemic times, General Ranjit Singh from Atlanta had done a street shashan for us on the, I would not forget that. General VK Singh would not forget that. Lot of host of army top brass would not forget that. Major General Ranjit Singh ji, we have a very, very special guest, as I have messaged to most people, but I did not disclose the name of the gentleman, Mr. N. Ram, because if I disclose the name, the entire fun would have been over. So I didn't disclose his name. But then the people will be very happily surprised to see and listen to him after a few minutes. Major General Ranjit Singh, opening remarks, freedom of speech and expression. You've been Vice Chancellor of 3 central universities. You are also an academician. What do you teach to the students? They can speak their heart out, but where is the line? Where do you draw the line?
Thank you, Amit ji. Once again, so nice of you. I got an opportunity again to interact with you and the August people. Amit ji, बहुत अच्छा लगता है. आप देश में एक बहुत अच्छा मैसेज दे रहे हैं. But really speaking, Amit ji, the freedom of speech in India definitely has to be curtailed. There's no doubt. We are really speaking, we are misusing the medium, whether the print media or the social media. Is there any political party, any politician except the government? Are they covering the correct views on education, nationalism, terrorism, development, poverty issues, or the Garland Canal, or even the latest? Is there anyone who has appreciated last month GST collection was 1.70 lakh crores? Nobody will speak on that, but they will just criticize. The medium people like, OSE, or some urban Naxals, they will misinform the people what is happening in UP or in Delhi or in some other places. Definitely, Amit, we have to curtail on these things. Country is progressing. The world is in a different stage, no doubt. Ukraine and Russia, everyone knows. The media, they will tell lies, there's no doubt. But in our country, definitely the media, whether it is social media or the print media, they must publish only the facts. They are diverting figures, they are diverting views, and they misguide the youth. And that is why the clashes are taking place in our country, whether it is Naxalism or the insurgency. My only submission through your media is because I'm very thankful to you that you are definitely sending a correct message to the country that the security of the state, the country, the public order, the decency, the morality by the actors, heroes and heroines at the cost of advertisement, and they should not show any vulgarity, what they are showing through various dresses. That definitely is not our culture. What Dr. Kalam has said, Shiksha, Sanskar, skill and Sanskriti. Our Sanskriti is not this. So ये किसी प्रकार की freedom नहीं है. That they can put on any day, anything, whatever beach they are standing. This is vulgarity. So the friendly relations with the countries, someone or political party makes a statement and they spoil our relations with the neighboring countries. Some time back, when we had Doklam or the Galwan issue, some people, political parties were having party in Delhi. That is not acceptable. When you are having such relations, it is no freedom. That must be curtailed, Amitji. And you know what I'm hinting at. When the country is about to fight a war with a country, you are having a tea party with the delegation of that country unofficially in your own terms, sometime in India, sometime abroad. This is not correct. This is no freedom. There's no doubt. It has to be curtailed, definitely. And the incitement by the media or by some people must be curbed. They must be punished, no doubt, Amitji. And in the subsequent course, in case if I'm given time, Amitji, I'll speak further. Let me first listen to the learned speakers. Thank you, Amitji. Jai Hind.
Without wasting any further time, I'll ask and request the special guest of honor for the evening today, Sri N. Ram, you know, the media giant, the man who knows the subject in and out. Then we'll obviously bring forward other speakers who keep joining, including the Chief Justice also, where in Article 19, these things we'll have a delve into, you know. But then before we get into those issues, Sri N. Ram, sir, you've seen the media's, you know, movement in this country over the last 50 years. You know the subject more than probably anybody else in this country. What do you think the evolution of media has been like, and especially with a focus on the current dispensation? When Mr. Modi came into power, there was a lot of, apprehension about his, way of working with the media. But do you think those things over the years have really changed? And in the last 50 years or so, or 75 years of India's independence, take us through the way the media has evolved in this country and the way forward in the next 25 years. Over to you, Mr. Ram.
Thank you, Mr. Amit Goenka, and my respects to Mr. Justice Balakrishnan, and my regards to Mr. Singh and other friends. Now, why are we speaking about freedom of the press in India today? There's a special reason, because today is World Press Freedom Day. And I was very happy, very pleased when Mr. Amit Goenka invited me personally. He called himself and invited me to speak on this subject. Now, World Press Freedom Day, that is May 3rd, was proclaimed, or rather May 3rd was proclaimed as World Press Freedom Day by the UN General Assembly in 1993. And since then, May 3rd has been observed every year as, quote, that's the official characterization, as a reminder to governments on the need to respect their commitment to press freedom. I repeat, as a reminder to governments of the need to respect their commitment to press freedom, and also, quote, as a day of reflection among media professionals about issues of press freedom and professional ethics. So there are two sides here. Just as importantly, World Press Freedom Day is a day of support for media which are targets for the restraint or abolition of press freedom. It is also a day of remembrance for those journalists who lost their lives in the pursuit of a story. This is the idea behind celebrating May 3rd as World Press Freedom Day. And we now come to India. We are all proud of the achievements of independent India, but there have also been big failures. I completely disagree with the approach of Mr. Singh, presented a little earlier, where the focus paradoxically on World Press Freedom Day was on restraining the media, not just the social media, but also the professional media. I disagree respectfully with Mr. Singh. It is my understanding that there are three basic reasons why we need to discuss the current state of freedom of the press in India. The first reason is the intrinsic relevance and value of journalism as a democratic craft. Journalism, as it has evolved in modern times, is best understood as a form of expression or brain work that includes making news judgments, gathering evidence, constructing narratives, and making sense of things. I'm talking here about professional journalism, not so-called citizen journalism or social media journalism and so on. And also as a method, journalism is also a method of capturing and representing the world of events and ideas as they occur. This is the basic purpose and value of journalism as a democratic craft. But journalism as a profession is not value neutral. Earlier, some people used to claim that we are completely objective, we are completely neutral. All that cannot be accepted. It's not true. As a sort of trade-off for the robust and far-going freedom, including freedom from all forms of prior restraint that journalism lays claim to, it accepts the obligation of exercising what is called social responsibility. As a whole, there's a huge literature on what social responsibility of the press, that is originally the printed press, and now, like, a range of media operating on different platforms, radio, television, digital platforms, and so on. So the best media organizations and the best practitioners of the democratic craft accept the obligation of social responsibility fully. And this is in the best traditions of journalism. As a professional, as a democratic craft, professionally practiced. Over the decades, there's been a substantial literature that has appeared on templates for socially and ethically accountable journalism, but also on the constitutive elements of journalism. It has yielded codes of practice or professional ethics. I assure Mr. Singh that serious journalists are committed to these codes of practice or to professional ethics that privilege such principles as truth-telling, freedom and independence, fairness and justice, humaneness, and working for the social good. At a practical level, the journalistic method of capturing and representing the world of events and ideas as they occur emphasizes such disciplines as fact-checking, verification, investigation, rigorous data sourcing and analysis, providing context and meaning, and maintaining proportionality and perspective. I want to emphasize this at the outset, that along with the claim we make, the strong and robust claim we make for freedom, media freedom, press freedom, freedom of the press, and if you're going to expand it, freedom of speech and expression, we willingly commit ourselves to this doctrine of social responsibility. Of course, different people may have different ideas of it, but by and large, professionally, there are codes of practice, codes of ethics, which are laid down clearly. It is self-evident that journalism as a democratic craft needs the widest freedom and space to flourish. our former Chief Justice, Mr. Justice Balakrishnan, called attention to it, highlighted it in his opening remarks. And I assume that most of us will not have any problem with the proposition that the democratic constitution and the rule of law must give high priority, not to restraining freedom of speech and expression, but to protecting freedom of speech and expression as a basic right available to all citizens. And freedom of the press, Supreme Court has read into Article 19(1)(a) in a number of judgments, freedom of the press, although it's not mentioned specifically in the Constitution. Article 19(1)(a) of our Constitution, we can be proud of our Constitution, even if some people are not. Some people are increasingly beginning to question the basic structure of the Constitution, but I'm not one of them. I'm not referring to any individual here, but that is a trend in society. They want a different kind of constitution, but that's not going to happen. But Article 19(1)(a) of this Constitution, of which we are proud, it was, of course, adopted in 1950. It came into, it commenced a little earlier, November of 49. It guarantees freedom of speech and expression as a fundamental right. This right, let us remind ourselves, was hard won in our freedom struggle against a highly repressive and censorious British Raj, a colonial Raj. And it is deemed to be unamendable thanks to the basic structure doctrine propounded by the Supreme Court of India. Clearly, freedom of speech and expression is part of the basic structure of the Constitution. And the Supreme Court has made it clear that the basic structure cannot be tampered with. Freedom of the press is obviously not explicitly mentioned in our Constitution, but the Supreme Court, as I mentioned earlier, has done a great job, a yeoman service to our Republic through judicial interpretation, because it has read into Article 19, the freedom of the press. It has held basically that freedom of the press is a combination of two freedoms. Article 19(1)(a), the freedom of speech and expression, that's the primary component, and Article 19(1)(g), the freedom to practice any profession or to carry on any occupation, trade, or business. The first, 19(1)(a), is clearly the principal component. And I myself, I don't want to mention all the, get into any detail here. I'm a beneficiary of Supreme Court judgments which came out on the side of freedom of the press, including most recently with reference to publication of documents relating to the Rafale deal in 2019. Unfortunately, and I must say this, we have to do a reality check. Notwithstanding the Supreme Court's judicial interpretations, freedom of speech and expression comes up against an expansive, an over-expansive article, in my opinion, Article 19(2). It provides restrictions on the fundamental right prescribed by law on 8 grounds. Just to remind those who are not familiar with these, with these aspects. And let us look briefly at these. 19 reads, protection of certain rights regarding freedom of speech, etc. All citizens shall have the right to freedom of speech and expression. And the qualification comes in 19(2), which basically says that nothing in this subclause of the clause shall affect the operation of any existing law or prevent the state from making any law, existing law as well as any prospective law, insofar as such law imposes, and this is the key word, reasonable restrictions. Reasonable restrictions. The doctrine of reasonableness to be judicially interpreted is being laid down there clearly on the exercise of the right. Not any kind of restriction. It has to be by statute, either an existing law or a prospective law duly made by the legislature. So reasonable restrictions can be laid down by law, by statute, on the exercise of the right meaning freedom of speech and expression, in the interests of I mentioned 8 heads. 1, sovereignty and integrity of India. We fully accept that. You can't question, you can't challenge that. The security of the state, we accept that. The security of the state is important. Friendly relations with foreign states, that's very rarely invoked. I don't know of any case where somebody's freedom has been restricted because you write critical things about say the United States or Russia or any other country. So that is largely doesn't come into force. Public order. This is an arguable thing. Public order and sometimes even sovereignty and integrity are brought in to defend unreasonable restrictions. But I'll come to that in a minute. Decency or morality. That is important. But approaches, everybody knows the world is changing. Young people have different yardsticks than older folk. The world is constantly changing. So what was considered indecent or immoral earlier would now be accepted. A lot of people live together. Earlier it would have been considered immoral outside marriage. But today it is increasingly accepted, both in town and countryside. And we have to make allowance for, we have to adjust to changing realities, whatever be your personal opinion. You may not do it. You may not want somebody to do it, but you cannot intervene in the public sphere in the name of your interpretation of decency and morality. But there are many things which are totally acceptable. And we won't go into that. Or in relation to contempt of court, defamation or incitement to an offense. Yes, incitement to an offense through misusing freedom of speech is wrong, but hate speech is wrong. There's plenty of it in India today, but I have problems with some of these. And that's now, there's a substantial and growing scholarly literature on the status of freedom of speech and expression under our Constitution, and part of that freedom of the press, and of the effectiveness and protection given to this fundamental right, first by our constitution makers. For example, Abhinav Chandrachud has come out with this book that the original, there are many, and Gautam Bhatia and others have written.
इसका वो दे दो stand mobile का.
Pardon?
On your mobile का stand.
What? Somebody.
I think there was something which Mr. Maheshwari, the former DG CRPS, spoke. I've just muted him. Sorry, sir. Please continue.
Thank you. So I think there are differences in this literature about how well the constitution makers protected freedom of the speech. Till there used to be a time when I thought that India was in an enviable position compared with other developing countries, so far as freedom of the press was concerned, and by extension, freedom of speech and expression. But today, I don't believe that. I think that, and I'll come to that in a minute, trying to substantiate that statement. I want to go back to the Constituent Assembly debates. Today, there may be differences, but there were also differences in the Constituent Assembly. We discovered dissenting voices demanding much stronger protection for freedom of speech and expression, and specifically for freedom of the press. The majority was not willing to concede these demands, but they were far-sighted in my opinion, and I'll mention that, I'll give you some names in a minute. They were far-sighted because they thought about possible future assaults and encroachments on this fundamental right by authoritarian governments and by high-handed legislatures. Somnath Lahiri, Damodar Swarup Singh, K.T. Shah, Sardar Hukum Singh, Pandit Thakur Das Bhargava, they were prominent among those who argued doggedly and persistently against the free hand being given to the state to restrict and negate freedom of speech and expression by allowing the state to impose restrictions on it on various grounds. And most importantly, the dissenters also wanted freedom of the press to be guaranteed explicitly and separately as a fundamental right, instead of being treated as an implied freedom. However, the dominant group, assured of the support of an acquiescent majority, would not budge from its somewhat conservative position on both issues. And the dissenters said they were, talked about the tyranny of the drafting committee. That's to quote a frustrated Mr. Bhargava. Naturally, the majority prevailed. I can sympathize with the majority because the situation was grim at that time. The constitution, partition after partition, the mass killings, the difficulties, the fact that so many princely states were there and had to be integrated, so on. So the situation was grim and very different from what we face today. So, but some good things happened as a result of these dissenters raising this issue. And I'll mention them because not many people are aware of these debates, or at least this aspect of the debates. At a happy moment, when tensions were running high in these debates, the leadership caved in, with the result that the assembly, the Constituent Assembly, adopted in a slightly modified way Mr. Sri Bhargava's amendment that the restrictions imposed by any existing or prospective law on various rights guaranteed by Article 13.1, which eventually became 19.1 of the Constitution, should be, and that's the key phrase, reasonable. They have to be reasonable. And reasonable is not to be tested by me or somebody else. It is, the final arbiter is the highest court of the land, our superior judiciary, and above all, the Supreme Court of India. The rights thus protected and made justiciable were the right to assemble peaceably and without arms, to form associations or unions, to move freely throughout the territory of India, to reside and settle in any part of the territory of India, to acquire, hold, and dispose of property, and to practice any profession or to carry on any occupation, trade, or business. But Mr. Sri Bhargava's demand that the qualification reasonable should apply to existing or prospective laws restricting freedom of speech and expression was rejected originally and found no place in the original Constitution of India, which is a disappointment. Happily, thanks to the First Amendment, which was enacted in 1951 in response to certain judicial decisions relating to fundamental rights and which expanded the scope of the exceptions, subclause 19.2, then the word reasonable was introduced to qualify restrictions, thus making them justiciable. Our respected Mr. Justice Balakrishnan will certainly appreciate the importance of this as a breakthrough. The doctrine of reasonableness and the fact making them justiciable was certainly a breakthrough in favor of freedom of speech and expression and freedom of the press, which is a part of it. Now, when the demand for specifically providing for freedom of press came out, Dr. Ambedkar, speaking for the leadership, rejected this demand on the grounds that press is another way of stating an individual or a citizen. Absolutely right. And that the press had no special rights which are not to be given or which are not to be exercised by the citizen in his individual capacity. Absolutely right. That the editor of a press or the manager are all citizens. And therefore, when they choose to write in newspapers, they are merely exercising their right of expression. And therefore, he said, no special mention is necessary of the freedom of press. It appeared very reasonable at that time, but today I wish that freedom of the press was specifically protected as a fundamental right, but I won't make a big point about it. Now I want to come to the reality check as briefly as I can. You can't get away from the fact that India doesn't rank very well in the World Press Freedom Index. It's not compiled by any conspirators or anything. It is compiled by Reporters Without Borders. And the 2021 World Press Freedom Index, compiled by Reporters Without Borders, which is an independent organization abroad, protecting journalists, reporters in particular, it documents a sharp deterioration in the state of press freedom across the world, including in the United States. A dramatic deterioration in people's access to information and an increase in obstacles to news coverage. Unfortunately, in 2021, India ranked 142 among 180 countries and territories figuring in this index. The country fact file appended to the index notes the killing of journalists, police violence against reporters, ambushes by political activists, reprisals instigated by criminal groups or corrupt local officials, hate campaigns on social media against independent journalists and media organizations, and criminal prosecution of journalists under the sedition law to gag them. And so we don't come out very well in international comparisons, but it's in a context where the whole thing has deteriorated, including in the United States and even in the UK. And the New York-based Committee to Protect Journalists, which is a professional body, an independent professional body, which is highly respected, has, after careful inquiry and strict verification, documented the work-related killings of journalists worldwide. That is 1,436, included there, among them 57 in India since 1992. 57 journalists have been killed in India for work-related killings since 1992. And of the 57 journalists killed in India, not for some private reason, a property dispute or something, work-related. And of the 57 journalists killed in India between 1992 and 2022, 41 were murdered in retribution for or to prevent news coverage or commentary. And the remaining 16 lost their lives while on dangerous assignments or when they were caught in crossfire. A breakdown of the subjects is interesting, covered by the murdered Indian journalists, is as follows: politics 24 out of 57, corruption 25, crime 15, human rights 8, culture 4, business 3, war 1. The numbers add up to more than the total because many of these targeted journalists had covered more than one subject. But that is not all. What is particularly troubling is, and this has been published by CPJ, or the Committee to Protect Journalists, the annual Global Impunity Index. It's a quantified ranking of countries where journalists are murdered in connection with their work. The cases remain unsolved and the killers go free. So not a single murder of a work-related murder of a journalist is resolved in the judicial process under the rule of law. And this is a great tragedy. So they compile, CPJ, a global impunity index to remind citizens and policymakers, decision makers, rulers, that there's a lot of work to be done. You cannot be in this index where journalists are murdered and the killers go free for a long period of time. I don't want to go into further details. There are positive spaces. There are many spaces where you can express yourself. I myself am able to speak. Investigative journalism is still alive and well in India, but the pressures are increasing. And on World Press Freedom Day, we owe it to ourselves. We owe it to our constitution. We owe it to our constitution makers. We owe it to our freedom fighters. We owe it to different generations, and particularly the youth, to work harder to protect and strengthen freedom of the press in India. Because what the press does, by press I mean all the media, all the news media, including news television channels, news radio, and digital platforms which deal with news, that we are part of a democratic process, and we are a democratic craft. Most of us, some of us fail, some of us go over the top, go overboard, some of us some journalists do trade in disinformation, misinformation, highly prejudiced journalism, even hate mongering, and so on, against particular communities. In the name of majoritarianism, they target minorities, sometimes Minority sections also go extreme, and they have also fanatical advocates among journalists and so on. So this must end. But by and large, I want to end on this note. Freedom of the press is important because journalism is a necessary part of our democracy, and it needs more space, it needs independence, and it also has to fulfill its responsibility, its social responsibility in a better way than is being done today. Easy to say this, very hard to do on the ground, but we can only try. So I thank Mr. Goenka for giving me this opportunity and this space to put forward my views on it. And I hope this will lead to a worthwhile discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Ram. Yes, it's a wonderful discourse. We have been privileged to be a part of from you, the giant of media space. 1975, I mean, before I bring in two more beautiful and great leaders who've joined us, first Lieutenant General of Northeast, my good friend and patron General KH Singh, Konsam Himalaya Singh. Welcome to the show, the first Lieutenant General of Northeast. And he is the interlocutor from the government side for NSCN as of now, as far as I know. And we've also been joined by former DG of CRPF, Shri AP Maheshwari, a fantastic speaker. But before I bring them on board, Mr. Ram, could you just throw some light upon the curtailment of media in the British Raj and the 75 emergency, and draw a parallel between the two periods?
Yes, there were many so far as the Raj was concerned, there were many anti-press. Those days it was just the printed press. So everything was targeted at print journalism, and particularly Indian language journals and newspapers. They brought in they were particular because they had a hard time following what was going on in the Indian press. They considered it as subversive, and subversive towards the Raj meant people were patriotic. That was what it was all about, and there were many instances of not only censorship but prosecution and persecution of those who fought for freedom. The most famous cases are the sedition cases against Mahatma Tilak, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, and Mahatma Gandhiji. As journalists, for their writings, and that is very relevant. Of course, they didn't have to serve their full term after that, but there were many such instances, and I think that is why there was a strong feeling that independent India should break out of this regime where freedom of free speech was suppressed, was punished, even up to the state, even life sentences were given for those who spoke out. And there was also regular censorship, quite an efficient thing so far as the English language press was concerned, but inefficient because they couldn't quite understand what was being written sometimes in indirect ways, which they would consider subversive in the Indian language journals and publications. There are many examples of this. And you had to pay deposits if you violated the rules that they had laid down. And it was not just sending people to prison, it was to bankrupt those media organizations which are financially very fragile. So this was the experience of the press in the freedom struggle. At the same time, some very good journalism emerged during the freedom struggle against this suppression and restrictions and censorship. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had the kind of press we had at the time of independence. That's my impression. I've also written on it, and there are several other books written on this subject. It was quite a heroic chapter for in many Indian journalists. And some of our tallest leaders were very fine writers themselves and excelled in journalism, purposeful and serious journalism. They edited newspapers. Two of the finest examples would be Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Mahatma Tilak, and Mahatma Gandhi. And there are several others, Nehru and many others who wrote. and there was plenty of space available despite the restrictions, because India was too big to hold down completely. So there's a heroic tradition of fighting for freedom of the press in pre-independent India, in under the Raj. Coming to the emergency, I remember it very well. I was one of those who, I was not part of any media organization at that time. We did our best to fight the emergency. Because at the time I met Mr. Advani, for example, who came to Chennai before he was detained with the emergency, and he found common ground in opposing censorship and other suppression of freedom, and many others, including on the left, fought it. So we know what happened during the emergency: total censorship, total authoritarianism, which even if a little thing came up, they would be, Kuldeep Nair, for example, was under the Maintenance of Internal Security Act, many others. So, but it could not last very long. And secondly, there was also an underground movement during the emergency. There's quite a large literature beneath the surface, underground really, subterranean, which flowered during that period. May not have had a great impact, but it was very considerable because it expressed people's feelings in different parts of India. I'm familiar with some of them because we gathered that material in some languages at least, and some of it came out after the emergency. But so far as the mainstream press was concerned, I would say with a great regret that I agree with Mr. Advani's famous statement that when you're asked to kneel, you crawled. And I think that applies to most sections of the mainstream press. It took them by surprise. They were traumatized by this attack. And it took quite, they could not really stand up against it. Whatever be the claims of individuals that I fought the emergency and so on, if you are in the mainstream press at that time, I don't know of any significant cases. Of course, we know that Ramnath Goenka was very unhappy about it, but even that he could not publish, or the statesman and so on could not publish what had happened. So these are my impressions of the emergency. And I don't think the kind of situation I described now can be compared with the emergency, because that was total and comprehensive with very little overt resistance by the mainstream press. Whereas today, I'm pleased to say, there is resistance. There are people who defy authoritarianism, who stand up for freedom of speech and expression, who express solidarity with those who are punished, who are very unhappy when a sort of double standards are applied, that some people, freedom of the press, a hate campaign by one section is all right, but a hate campaign by another is not, or a response for another is not. And I think there are people who are very critical of this and opposed to it, including a lot of former civil servants who have come together, IAS and IPS officers and other service, All India service officers, retired officers, including those from the armed services, have come forward to express their unhappiness over the pressures and assaults that have been experienced in recent times by people who want to be independent, whether you are in the press or outside. So this is the fact, and we must face it, not get over defensive and say, oh, we don't care about what others think abroad. India is seeking to be a global power. So what people think abroad is important for you. You don't have to go only by that, but your reputation, or in marketing terms, your brand value is important, and it has to be global. So no use cocooning yourself and say, I'll decide for myself only. Nobody else can speak about it, and resent any criticism or any unpleasant information, however true, that comes out. And that is something that I think we have to get over. We have to grow up. We have to grow up in this respect. nationalism is important, patriotism is important, but patriotism doesn't consist of cocooning yourself and closing your eyes to what the rest of the world thinks, because we have our reputation, our international reputation. You claim to be the world's largest democracy, certainly in terms of elections, that is true. But are we the kind of democracy that our constitution makers and our best minds have imagined, have dreamt about? I doubt we are. And we have to be realistic, we have to be truthful, and we have to criticize ourselves when deficits are found. Only then we can improve, and only then, when we reach exactly 75, that day, 75 years of independence, you will be able to hold your head high.
Mr. Ram, you rightly pointed out. I'll bring in the other guests also, and before that, I would request Justice Balakrishnan to throw some light upon whether we need changes in this Article 19, especially considering, as Mr. Ram has self-admittedly pointed out from the media's perspective, society has changed, the world has changed, the way we look at things has changed. People did not respect staying together, living together. So the living together is a way of life in India as well. Westernization is picking up. We are increasingly getting into the world order when it comes to the cultural aspects as well. So, Justice Balakrishnan ji, sir, do you think there are some important changes that are probably needed from Indian society's perspective as far as Article 19 is concerned?
I don't think that there is any amendment is required or any change is required. It was pointed out by Leonard C. Ram that health and morality is one of the grounds of restrictions. On the ground of health and morality, the morality principles may vary. What we thought of not moral is considered to be moral, but the living in a relationship and all now is not very considered to be very much taboo. So we need not this interpretation also. The court will interpret and taking into consideration the changes in the society. Courts are also human beings. They know what is happening in the society, what is the nature of the interpretation that is to be given to the very. That is, I don't require any amendment is required, but the court will take into consideration this aspect as well. When considered morality, they will apply the standards which are prevalent now in the society. That is the situation which we have to take into consideration.
General, sir, thank you so much. General K.H. Singh, Consul Himalaya Singh, you have been the first Lieutenant General of the Northeast. You know the entire Northeast Territory in and out. You've also led India to many wars, including the 71 war. And you've been into the Jammu and Kashmir, Poonch area space, along with great leaders like General VK Singh during the toughest of terrorism times. This freedom of expression and speech, I was talking to the former DGP Jurubero, who was instrumental in curbing the Punjab terror in the 80s, and former DGP, 94-year-old Mr. Julio Francis Ribeiro told me that unbridled freedom of speech expression can lead to even terrorism, can even lead to insurgency, because it is all about expressing your desires, expressing your needs, and then a lot of times substance gets diluted by the power of pen, by the power of communication. So, and henceforth, people who are simple people who are not into this political space as such, they get or they fall prey to it because of political as well as economic compulsions. Your say on this, Lieutenant General K.S. Singh.
Good evening, Mr. Amit. Thank you very much for your giving me this platform where General VK Singh, then our Honorable ex-Chief Justice of India, Mr. Balakrishnan, and Mr. N. Ram, along with them, I'm getting this platform to express my views. First of all, a little correction. I didn't take part in 1971 war. It was in 1999 Kargil ops in against Pakistan. So not 1971. Thank you. As far as freedom of expression, in a little different environment like Northeast India and Jammu and Kashmir, where there were far too many ethnic wars and also revolutionary wars were taking place just after independence of India. I mean, the independent by 1950s, early 1950s, the insurgency has started in Northeast India, in Nagaland, Naga Hills, and soon followed by Mizoram, Manipur, then Assam, Tripura, all these places. So what happens is, firstly, I support freedom of expression as mandated by the Constitution of India. In a special places like Northeast India, where the Disturbed Areas Act has been imposed, one has to be very, very careful about what does the freedom mean. Sometimes it can mean the freedom to the underground elements, armed groups, and denying the freedom of expression to the common people by these armed gangs, not by the establishment. So there are multiple layers which were operating. Having said that, I can say with a lot of confidence that things have improved significantly in the last 15 years as far as the freedom of press is concerned. Otherwise, right from 1950s till about 2005 or 2010, what Mr. N. Ram described, the situation during emergency 1975 days, was applicable in parts of Manipur, Nagaland, Mizoram, and even part of Tripura and Assam as well. So when the narrative against the country is being built by anti-India or anti-national forces through the medium of expression, they tend to subvert the minds of the young people. So that is the time when there can be a debate as to what amounts to the truth and what is not the truth, because that is something, a gray zone area. Like you are seeing even today, what is happening between Russia and Ukraine, a lot of this information flow, I think 100%, 99% are motivated kind of a information flow from both sides. So similarly, in a conflict situation, as in low intensity conflict situation, like in northeastern states or in Jammu and Kashmir, these have to be very, very, the handling of the media, then, and the definition of freedom of the media, which might have been subverted by the armed groups, that has to be looked into very, very carefully. Because as it is in the Northeast India, you have so many restrictions on all certain privileges given by the Constitution of India. You have the Article 371, you have the Armed Forces Special Power Act as a some kind of a law to control the insurgency situation. You have various powers given to local bodies and autonomous council and what have you. So in this ecosystem, the freedom of expression sometimes tend to get on the nerve of somebody else, So therefore, this has to be very, very carefully handled. That is my suggestion to you, Amit.
Let me formally welcome the current Minister of State, General Dr. VK Singh, Vijay Kumar Singh, one of the probably the biggest pillar of Vision India Forum's initiative of Amrit Mahotsav since the last 15 months. General Sahab, Namaskar, Jai Hind. I have pushed him on the Eid day, on the Akshaya Tritiya day. Out of the 175, 100 shows he has graced because of his love and passion for the nation. And General VK is the current Minister of State, Civil Aviation and Road Transport and Highways. He is also known not for very friendly remarks against the press. So General Saab, freedom of speech and expression and media in particular, the age of TRPs, with the age of TRPs, in the age of social media, in the age of Atmanirbhar Bharat when it comes to speaking. So, because to each his own, that is only what we understand instead of to make in India. So, General VK Singh, over to you, sir. What do you think of freedom of speech and expression and unbridled, unfettered, and to each his own? Is it the way we go forward from here? जनरल साहब माइक ऑन करिए, माइक ऑन करिए.
Thank you, Amit. I'll be a kind of little brief because of today's two festivals and the constituency's engagements of the same. Let me just leave a few thoughts. First, is freedom of press unbridled? This needs to be examined. And it needs to be examined by people who are in the press, who write, who speak, who project it. No freedom can ever be unbridled. Please go through the history. Freedom without responsibility creates chaos. And I repeat it. Freedom without responsibility creates chaos. And let me now give you a small example for my press friends. You all would remember that there was something which happened where the Democratic Republic of Congo was concerned. There was a student who was killed in a scuffle in Delhi sometime in 2016-17. And we went around talking to the people of that area as to what had happened. We had a little gathering, the police was there. We wanted to find out why such a thing should happen. Everybody expressed the views, and then there was a person, aged, must have been one of the very senior members of that village. He said, Sahab, सबसे बड़ी मुश्किल है जब हमारा मीडिया बिना कुछ सोचे चीजों को बोलता है. He said it was a very simple matter, but it got projected in a different manner altogether. And then he said, if you remember, there was the blast which had taken place in France. And he said, उस टाइम का फ्रांस का मीडिया देख लीजिए और उस हालत में अगर हमारा मीडिया होता है तो उसको कंपेयर कर लीजिए. Now I leave it to my friends in the media. Please do introspection. If today, and I think Lieutenant General Himalaya said very rightly, the war in Russia and Ukraine, I think if our media had its way, by now we should have had a world war. You look at the headlines, you look at the way it is projected, you look at, the things which are given out, the visuals, the comments. Is it desired? Freedom of speech, yes. Freedom of expression, yes. But freedom without responsibility, a big no. A no in font 100, not even in font 14 or 16. I think this is something which needs to be clearly understood as the nation grows, as we become more mature. Well, 70 years have gone by. This is the 75th year. I think by now, vibrant media should also become more responsible. Democracy does not mean that you can do anything. Freedom doesn't mean that you can do anything. Freedom means doing things the right way. Yes, you've got all the right to bring out whatever is happening, whatever is being said. You take the episode of Kargil War. The famous media person of that time, Barkha Dutt, was her conduct responsible? Cross your hearts and ask yourself. Problem is, we do not want to understand it. Couple of days back, I put out a comment on something which had come out on New York Times. Of course, I understand the various party trolls take over. They've learned how to troll. But when a name from press gets involved in it, I just wanted to sit back and think. I didn't want to react to it because I thought it was most immature for a press person to jump into it. If you want to know more about New York Times, read a book called The Grey Lady, written by a person who has worked for New York Times throughout his life. There's much more. Let's this brotherhood amongst clansmen is good, but a brotherhood which does not believe in responsibility is not good. And I firmly believe in press freedom, in the freedom of expression, in bringing to light things which are wrong, which should help the country in moving forward in a more positive manner. But if you only want to do negative reporting, if you only want to pull things or misquote or misrepresent, then it is not good for press. We have had this for a very long time. There was a time when Ramnath Goenka was restricted things. Subsequently, can we say the same? He underwent a lot of traumatic times, but he stood firm on reporting correctly. He never gave headlines which were misleading. He never gave headlines which created confusion and dismay. He just reported what was right. The media needs to remember, you work for the society. Media works to ensure that the social changes which are coming as the time goes by are correctly portrayed so that it does not create any confusion in the growth of the nation. I'm not asking you to take sides of anybody, but be impartial and don't be impatient. These are the few things which I wanted to say. Thank you very much,
General
Amit, for having me.
Sahab, 3 to 5 more minutes, if possible. Mr. Ram, since General is also there, and with Justice KG Balakrishnan, Maheshwari ji, sorry, I'm not able to bring you in because I really need you to speak on the the role media plays, the role communication, freedom of speech and expression plays in terms of CRPF, Naxal, and all those things. But Mr. Ram, we are in the age of TRP vis-a-vis media trials. TRPs drive media trials, and there is absolutely no end to it when it comes to issues of national relevance. So much so that even 2611 was messed up by people like us. So, I mean, what are your views on this?
Yes, I agree that some of that coverage was over the top, and media trial in the media, I think, is wrong because people's reputations are harmed without adequate evidence. And prematurely also, and then you can't really undo the harm once you level an allegation. Even if you publish a correction or apologize, a lot of people won't see it, and usually the apology will appear in very small print or very, very rarely. So, in a sense, there's no remedy to it if you make that mistake. And responsibility is important, but the question is who judges.
But then can there be deterrents which can be set up, Justice Balakrishnan? Can there be deterrents on this? Because, all this sugary talk around responsibility, sugary talk around self-regulation is fine, but without deterrence, without the legal, contours being, properly designed. Justice sir, I know. At least give us some concrete view, please.
It is difficult to impose any restriction on this. The self-imposed restriction alone. They should express their social responsibility. They should realize their duties first and their social responsibility and behave properly. Any imposition from outside could only be violated, will generate more litigation, more controversies. I don't think
we have the NBSA National
it
Board of
was once tried. The Supreme Court wanted to create a sort of guidelines and all. I think they later they gave up that idea.
Amit ji, can I come in on this?
Yes, sir. Please, sir.
Yeah, we have the Statutory Press Council of India, but most people think it's a toothless body, either to protect freedom of the press or to protect citizens against misuse and so on. It serves some purpose because it's worked out. On some cases, it expresses its opinion, but it has no real enforcement powers. So that has to be noted. But there was an interesting experiment in the UK after the phone hacking scandal, this scandalous behavior of the red tops. You know that, Mr. Goenka. Some of those went much worse than anything seen in India. The kind of scandalous journalism that was there, and rogue practices like hacking the phones of people and then using it for journalism. Now, the response to that was the Leveson inquiry, which on paper sounded excellent. So what was the Leveson? What are the Leveson recommendations? It was self-regulation underwritten by statute. In other words, professionals had to, independent professionals had to be constituted as an ombudsman body, but this would be required by statute. The statute wouldn't prescribe what kind of arrangement it would be, but it had to be independent and credible. And to support what Mr. Justice Balakrishnan just said, the same thing happened. Nothing was enforced. They spent a long time, excellent suggestions, excellent material was surfaced, but at the end of the day, the newspaper industry, neither the newspaper industry nor the political establishment of the UK was willing to go for the Leveson suggestion, which I think is a lesson for India also. So if you are to have regulation, it has to be very light-handed. If it is heavy, and even the Supreme Court, we have just heard that the Supreme Court, I didn't know that the Supreme Court at one point, perhaps when he was Chief Justice of India, was contemplating this, was thinking about it, and correctly concluded that it was not possible. So I think that's, so regulation has to be self-regulated, but there must be a social pressure of some kind to put that in place. Otherwise, they may not regulate. And we are talking about far out elements, extreme elements in the media, or those who are just looking at commercial gain or anything that goes. They are not going to be restrained by any self-regulatory body, particularly if it's
we are towards the fag end of the show. Mr. Dr. A.P. Maheshwari, probably 5 to 10 more minutes now with the show, and then we'll close the show. It's been a wonderful show. Dr. A.P. Maheshwari ji, former DG of CRPF, somebody who has been, very closely associated with curbing many anti-national issues in the country. Freedom of speech, expression, and media's role. As your role in the CRPF, how difficult or how easy does this doctrine make it for bureaucrats like you, for nation savers like you?
Yeah, thank you for giving me an opportunity at the outset. I must say that CRPF is the internal security for the states to control law and order and special situations of Maoist violence. To start with, I would say yes, freedom of expression is the fourth pillar of any democracy. that bridges the gap between the government and the people. This is very important. And the recent speakers, when they raised the issue of freedom versus onus, this is important. But this is equally important for all the pillars in the democracy. And lately we see, ever since I talked to many media people. Now, two things they generally report, that they want to call an X an X, they want to write professionally, but most of the media companies are controlled by capitalists. Now, what type of goals do they have, or what are their stakes, which come in conflict with the party in power or the governance, which we have seen very closely in the field. This is one issue. So it is not only the media, but the media control is the capitalist now. So then their TRP business, the profitability, that we have to be one now. Now, all these things, when they one of the judges, the honorable judges, raised the issue of morality. Yes, it is a question of morality also, but not only with respect to media, the overall environment within which they are working. Why the today media is scared? Because probably somebody is controlling data. They are scared of getting harm from some quarters. Now, these are the broader governance issues. The second challenge which is coming is that there's a stratification in the society. In the remote areas, the Naxal areas, in the Kashmir and the Northeast, radio is still a potent source of information, many of the remote areas. The English newspapers and English channels only cover 9%, and then the regional press has come. And now this electronic media, again, is an issue. In electronic media, because you show the visuals, by any management science, the visuals give you the retention of 80 to 85%, whether it's the written material. So when General VK Singh raised this issue, it is correct. When anything happens here, you show the person bleeding throughout the day. That arouses the public sentiments. One must understand that media is the mirror of the society. So when you communicate, you affect the communication, the thought process, the cognitions of the people. If one person slaps somebody, you are showing it slapping throughout the day. That arouses a different type of perception. So these type of silent communication distortions coming from media side, number one. Number two, in the time of social media now, everybody is a journalist and everybody is a publisher. Now, we are coming up with the new acts and rules to control social media. Even the data protection bill, which will come, will pose its new challenges, whether the confidentiality of the data, who is publishing, the traceability of that, and quick, encryption from source to say, these are the issues which will be coming in the legal domain. But these are the relevant issues, because even now, whatever the press is saying or the media is saying, the people are so much aware because of the social media, and the things reach very fast. And therefore, the government has to take those, they close down, shut down the media, shut down the internet connections. And then there are other issues, because so many schemes of development, are dependent on that. There are still the areas where the internet connections are not there. Even the developmental activities are not taking place. So when we are talking about the freedom is actually a freedom when there's an equal opportunity to the society, people at large. So when we look at the media, the coverage in the remote areas, so that what happens then when there's no proper coverage to the men on the ground, then the middlemen come in between, and those middlemen, distort the facts so in these conflict-prone areas, there are so many distortions coming up because there are different narratives. And this is what is happening through social media. You change a narrative, you change the mindset of a person. So we have come over to the police has also come over with the cognitive policing now. Now the cognitive policing is reading the mindset, how a person is thinking, how is the publication, this sort of radicalization which is taking place on the platforms. Now that creates various situations of terrorism, and that brings a gap between the governance and the public. And as long as there is a gap between the governance and the public, the third people who are the manipulators, either in a communal field, otherwise people stay very peacefully. But suddenly the fever comes for 3 days, because those so-called communal leaders, in order for their own benefits, they create narratives and they distort. And after 3 days, again, everybody is staying together. And you find there's a peace around. Why this happened for 3 days? And similarly, in those conflict-prone areas, there's a huge gap. Whosoever controls the people rules the roost, basic fundamental. If the governance does not do it, and here comes the role of media. And we have taken help of very good media people. You know, there's the world over, there's a theory of 20-80. I say there's a 20-60-20. 20 will remain bad come what may, 20 will remain good come what may. It is the 6. If you have a good leadership and you have a good governance. So this is balancing all these factors on the ground reality. So we cannot even outrightly blame, but I definitely agree with you कि बिना भय के प्रीति नहीं होती है. So we definitely need laws and a strict implementation such of it, some sort of a deterrence, because that remains a fear. Like even in India, the election reforms came as long as they had a fear that there's a camera outside, it is recording everything, and later on they will be taken to task. That is how the election reforms came. Otherwise, you would hear of booth catching. And number 2 is the social awareness. When people know that yes, we have a right to information, and I cite an example of smoking. It is just because of awareness in people, the consciousness. So when it comes to morality, the corruption side of it, then corruption or immorality in profession is when honorable judges will also realize when you were children, these were not the very limited people you would identify. Even the society will, boycott those type of people. Now, the consciousness in society came through, like you won't find a cop stopping anybody. Anybody visiting your drawing room will be very shy of even lighting a cigarette. Even if he has to go and say, sir, I've got to make a call, and you understand why is he moving out of your house. So these are the practical, problems which we face. And this is what my feedback is in the short period you have given to me. I am thankful to you for giving this opportunity. Now, unity amongst diversity, amidst so much of the stratifications in the society is a very relevant factor. Even when it comes to seeking justice, it is advocate-based judiciary. Only those people who can hire good advocates, they go, they argue everything. I'm not criticizing anybody from any forum. I'm just giving the reality from the ground. And as one of the judges said, yes, there is a tendency on the part of executives not to do its work so that the judicial cases are increasing. That is also true. And when judicial cases are not decided in time, that leads to further deterioration in law and order. And that creates a problem. Therefore, the extrajudicial action with the police is forced to take under public pressure or political pressure. These are all related issues. So we need an effective media, an honest media, and we must always try, because that's the only platform between the public and the governance and the judiciary. That is the only platform. So it's a very important issue raised. We have to see it behaviorally. We have to see in terms of the ecosystem in the society. We have to see it in terms of the laws of which honorable judges have spoken about. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Maheshwari. I think because of the paucity of time, we could not hear more from you, but you seem to have very, very constructive and very, very, maverick ideas on the subject, because I was also going to raise this issue of capitalism vis-a-vis media nexus, which ultimately is the crux of all the problems today, because it's all driven, money drives everything. We're closing the show now, but before we end the show, some closing remarks from Mr. M. Ram, and finally we will close from Mr. VK Singh, and then the Honorable Chief Guest's word will be the last word. As always, social media, please throw some light on it. It's a very, 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 very big time bomb ticking very fast.
Yes, that puts tremendous pressure on everything, daily life, but also specifically on the media and on journalism. And earlier there was a romantic view of the social media. There was much talk about, you remember that, Mr. Goenka, that you talk about citizen journalism to break out of this space and so on. But today, a lot of the misinformation and disinformation comes from the social media, like Facebook, even Google on search, WhatsApp, which is a closed system. A lot of harmful messages, toxic messages come out. We make a distinction between misinformation, which is just incorrect, wrong information, but not motivated or deliberate, and disinformation, which is weaponized, which is false information, which is weaponized, deliberate, motivated, and often scaled up. And the most recent development, when somebody like enormously wealthy man, Elon Musk, is now virtually tied up his acquisition of Twitter, he says that I'm a free speech absolutist, but he wants to take it private. And it means that there'll be even less regulation of the toxic, harmful material, harmful not just in terms of hate, but wrong information on, the virus, on what to do to protect yourself from the virus as well as the disease, COVID-19, anti-vaxxers holding forth on the social media, putting out blatantly false, deliberately false information. This is seen as a threat even by WHO to public health all over the world. So today, our perception and attitude towards social media have to be a lot more, not just critical, but suspicious, I think, in many cases. And you really have to apply the journalistic technique or the investigative techniques that our law and order forces are familiar with, of verification, of investigation. Who is behind this, in order to swallow anything that is put out on many of these platforms. And on the other hand, there's some excellent material that is put out by the social media, for example, on COVID. But you got to see who's putting it out, whether it's verified and so on. Excellent material on what to do about masking, about the different types of vaccines, about COVID appropriate behavior, which really is important. That's also there. So but overall, I'm involved in an exercise by the BBC called the Trusted News Initiative, which is addressing these issues, where both media, news media, major organizations, and the so-called technology companies come together to see what's happening. But I'm not very optimistic about the future of the social media. Again, the question of regulation comes up. Europe will do much more than the United States, but we are all exposed to everything. And and even in India, regulation becomes extremely difficult.
I understand, sir. You are truly, you're absolutely.
Sorry,
I think you hit the nail on the head. But solutions, concrete solutions, I think the ministries are also working towards it. But I personally am not aware of any remote solutions that are in the sight, because all these social media things that we see or are being, exposed to, or are being fed, are basically feeding on the basic needs that Mr. Abraham Maslow had, once. There's the Maslow's matrix, which says that the basic needs are the easiest targets for anything to capture attention, and for attentivity. Actualization obviously is a tough process. We in the media need to ensure that the rules, regulations, the government, the laws, are made such that the exploitation of these basic needs for the material purposes by these fly-by-night operators can really damage the moral, social, and economic fabric of developing a very, very new nation like India post-independence. General VK Singh, quickly, sir, 2 minutes for your closing remarks.
I'll take only 1 minute, Mr. Goenka. As Mr. N. Ram said, once you weaponize the media, once you weaponize any kind of freedom of media, social media or otherwise, and start attacking any other entity, those entities are bound to counter-attack you. So therefore, I don't see any other alternative except through the judicial channels to actually have some kind of a control over this now the media houses are threatening even the sovereignty of various nations. So therefore, I don't see any other solution, all the self-regulation or any law, but I think judicial activism or whatever you call, I think that could be the only way out as I see it, because the media war, the weaponization is getting far, far ahead of any of our present structure of governance. Thank you.
General VK Singh, I think you used a word called activism. I say that at least whistleblowing is a process which should be inculcated across all Indians, because if we start the whistleblowing at the right moment, we need not be an activist, because activism can be agenda driven as well. Whistleblowing is issue driven. So as long as we can blow the whistle at the right moment, and that culture gets imbibed in the youth of this country, because I was just privy to some discussion from some youth where they were saying, see, the entire world is corrupt, the entire world runs on money, my father has given me everything, why do you need to bother about anything that's going, everything is wrong everywhere, so I need to just focus on my happiness in the world, I don't need to even think about what's wrong. So that is the mindset that needs to be changed. Media can at least start the whistleblowing culture. Justice KG Balakrishnan sir, Honorable Chief Justice sir, final word.
Whistleblowing is also required at some stage in some matters. We cannot completely disown whistleblowing, because we must also realize that the corruption is in all types of activities in the country. And there should be a fear psychosis among those who indulge in these sort of illegal things. And to control the media is difficult. But as Mr. Ram pointed out, the social media that is giving all sorts of false and frivolous information, it is very difficult. The only educated and well-known people, they can digest and understand the things properly. But there are large number of ordinary people see this. They believe them to be true. That is sometimes unfortunate. But of course, the social media is doing wonderful things. Many things about the COVID, many things about the how to health programs and all this, they are doing it. It is well and good. But at the same time, they mislead people and try to capitalize certain things. Maybe just for a joke or something, but it is so rampant that it is difficult to control either. They should themselves realize the social responsibility. I don't think any legislation or the judicial activism will control the judiciary. I don't know, after this COVID period of 2 years, judiciary is in serious difficulties because of the large pendency of cases, especially the criminal cases, how to try and complete this workload. Nobody is now thinking of that situation. Anyway, I congratulate Mr. Amit for having chosen a very vital subject at the most appropriate time. And we have got a wonderful exposition on the subject by eminent people. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Justice Saab, I will just end the show on this note, though I'm not very optimistic about self-regulation. It is never an option, I think. But I'll just end on this note. As Mr. Hicks, the father of media, probably Mr. Ram would know better, said that newspapers' job is to, as the acronym stands for Northeast, West, South, past and present event reports. That is what we should focus upon. Thank you so much. Jai Hind. See you again. Thank you.